The galaxy had never known peace, but it had known Earth's noise, humans constantly pushing boundaries, breaking rules, and creating chaos in every corner of the cosmos. But one day Earth went silent. No messages, no signals, no contact, just nothing. For the first time in history, the galaxy held its breath. Everyone waited, speculated, feared the worst until Earth finally spoke again. And when it did, it wasn't a plea for help or an offer of peace. It was a single word, and that moment, the universe realized that humanity had been playing a game none of them even knew existed. The galaxy trembled. Enough. It all started with a silence. Not a quiet one you could ignore. This was the kind that made the hairs on the back of your neck stand up. The kind that made even the most hardened intergalactic leaders squirm in their seats. Earth, once a bustling hub of communication, trade, and human ingenuity, simply stopped. No signals, no transmissions, not a peep. The planet that once boasted the loudest, most rambunctious presence in the galaxy suddenly became an eerie void. At first they thought it was a glitch. Perhaps Earth was experiencing some technical hiccup. After all, they were always tinkering with their primitive technology. Maybe their subpar communications infrastructure had malfunctioned. No one thought much of it at first. But as the minutes turned to hours, and then days, the unease began to spread like wildfire. And not the kind of fire that can be put out with a bucket of water. No, this was the kind of fire that made you start wondering if the galaxy had finally met its match. The Galactic Council, that body of self-important bureaucrats that had been governing the stars for eons, wasn't sure what to make of it. For centuries, they had dismissed humanity as a noisy, uncoordinated mess of a species barely worth acknowledging. Earth was nothing more than a pawn in the grand cosmic game, a little speck in the vastness of space. Yet now the sudden, deafening silence from the planet sent ripples through every council member's carefully cultivated composure. The silence wasn't just about a lack of communication, it was a declaration. A cosmic "we're done being quiet." Meanwhile, on the other side of the galaxy, a fleet of alien traders found their routes disrupted. Planets that had relied on Earth for resources, goods, and let's be honest, a bit of intergalactic flair, suddenly found themselves stranded. Supplies stopped, and the usual banter of interspecies commerce fell silent. It was the sort of situation that would make anyone question their life choices. After all, how could you continue a profitable trade relationship when your primary source of goods had just vanished off the grid? Fear didn't come instantly, but it came soon enough. The chatter that once filled every corner of the galaxy was replaced by nervous whispers. Did you hear? Is it true? What if it's something else? A ripple of tension flowed through the political structures of alien empires. The first tremor of panic was subtle but unmistakable. Some began to wonder if Earth had finally developed a new weapon, something so advanced it had rendered all communication systems useless. Others entertained darker thoughts. Perhaps the humans had gone rogue, intentionally isolating themselves from the rest of the galaxy as a sign of strength. The possibilities were endless, but none of them felt good. For the first time in centuries, the galaxy's power players weren't sure of anything. They were being forced to acknowledge a thought they never wanted to entertain. Perhaps Earth wasn't the insignificant little speck they'd always assumed. Perhaps humanity had been playing a different game entirely. It was only a matter of time before that unsettling silence would break. The question was, would the galaxy be ready for what came next? The silence from Earth continued, and the galaxy started to feel it in their bones. Something was wrong. Something big. But no one knew what. The Galactic Council, that pompous group of self-assured individuals, was scrambling to figure out how to handle it. The council members, who were used to dominating any situation, were now pacing the vast, sterile halls of their chambers, exchanging nervous glances. They couldn't figure out if Earth's sudden disappearance was an act of defiance or a sign of something much more terrifying. Either way, they were in no position to ignore it. After all, this was Earth, the planet that had single-handedly toppled the greatest galactic empires when it was cornered. Now it was simply gone. Some council members tried to downplay the situation. "Oh, I'm sure it's nothing. Probably just a technical issue," one said, though his voice cracked slightly, betraying his uncertainty. But others weren't so easily convinced. They knew better. After all, no one had seen anything like this before. Earth wasn't like the other planets. While most planets were content with their quiet little existence, Earth had a tendency to kick up a storm when it felt like it. And this wasn't just silence. This was a threat. The first tremor of panic hit the trading sectors. Alien merchants who had once relied on the lively exchanges with Earth's colonies were left staring at blank screens, twiddling their mandibles in confusion. There were no shipments, no trade signals, nothing. Earth had always been a hyperactive participant in the galactic economy, and now that absence was wreaking havoc. Some traders found themselves floating in space, ships laden with goods they couldn't offload. One particularly disgruntled trader, whose shipment of rare spices was now worth its weight in platinum, was last seen muttering about paying for a decent communication system. The humor wasn't lost on anyone except him, of course. The fear spread like a virus, infecting even the most distant parts of the galaxy. Ships on their way to Earth changed course, diverting to avoid whatever was happening. The diplomatic channels that once hummed with back-and-forth negotiations now had a faint, unsettling chill to them. The silence from Earth wasn't just an inconvenience, it was a riddle wrapped in an enigma with a side of existential dread. Everyone was talking about it, but no one knew what to do about it. A handful of the more paranoid factions started making frantic preparations. Weapons were moved. Fleet readiness drills were initiated. It wasn't that they thought Earth was preparing to attack, well, not entirely, but more that they were starting to wonder if the humans were about to pull out some surprise that would make the rest of the galaxy's weaponry look like toys. The Council knew better than to dismiss the idea outright. After all, Earth had a history of making impossible things possible. And if anyone had the ability to throw the galaxy into chaos with nothing but a good old-fashioned surprise, it was them. Back on Earth, the silence continued, and with it, a new kind of tension. Empires that had long viewed humanity as a mere blip in the cosmic timeline now found themselves pondering. What if this was it? What if the humans, for all their flaws, had somehow outgrown the galaxy? What if they were about to show everyone just how powerful they could be when they weren't busy being underestimated? The galaxy was on the brink, and no one knew what would happen when Earth finally spoke again. As the silence dragged on, the galaxy could no longer pretend that nothing had changed. A gnawing sense of dread settled over every empire, every trade route, and every diplomatic table. The usual bravado of the Galactic Council was replaced with frantic meetings, speculative theories, and the occasional hushed conversation about what could possibly make Earth fall off the map like this. There were rumors, wild, terrifying rumors, whispers of a weapon so powerful, so devastating, that it could render an entire fleet useless with a mere flick of a switch. It wasn't just a weapon, it was the weapon. The kind of tool that made seasoned generals break into a cold sweat. And Earth? Earth might have one. But the Council wasn't just worried about a weapon, it was also the possibility that the humans had finally uncovered something they'd long kept secret. Something far older, deeper, and far more dangerous than anything anyone had ever imagined. Earth had always been a home to strange and brilliant minds, each one more unpredictable than the last. One theory gaining traction was that the silence wasn't a malfunction or some elaborate prank. No, Earth had somehow stumbled upon a force buried beneath its surface, an ancient power, hidden away from the galaxy's prying eyes for centuries. A power so immense that to tap into it was to play with the very fabric of the universe. And as far-fetched as it sounded, no one was willing to dismiss it outright. After all, this was Earth we were talking about, the same Earth that had, on more than one occasion, stared down the most formidable threats the galaxy had ever seen and emerged victorious. The same Earth that had transformed from a backwater planet into a thriving hub of innovation, exploration, and yes, occasional chaos. If humanity had finally unlocked something unimaginable, the rest of the galaxy might be in for a rather uncomfortable awakening. The more practical minds in the Council began to question if the humans had gone rogue. Maybe they'd realized they didn't need the rest of the galaxy anymore. Maybe Earth had decided to go it alone, severing all ties and cutting off communication as a way of signaling to the galaxy, "We don't need you." The idea alone sent shivers down the spines of the galaxy's most powerful leaders. A lone Earth, standing firm and silent, was more terrifying than any army they could imagine. Humanity didn't need diplomacy when they had the power to back up their silence. And what if the humans had finally decided that their time as underdogs was over? Meanwhile, in the quieter corners of the galaxy, various factions began their own preparations, some with a sense of dread, others with a touch of annoyance. A group of Zoraki smugglers, accustomed to running from authorities rather than dealing with them, saw the absence of Earth signals as an opportunity. What's the worst that could happen? They shrugged, moving their illicit shipments through less charted space. But even they could sense something amiss. It was almost like the galaxy itself had put the brakes on, as if waiting for something major to unfold. No one could shake the feeling that whatever happened next would change everything. The galactic news feeds buzzed with speculation, and for once, even the more skeptical aliens couldn't ignore the growing sense of anticipation. Some started to wonder if the humans were simply letting the galaxy stew in uncertainty before revealing their hand, waiting until the last possible moment to show what they had in store. And if there was one thing humanity was good at, it was leaving a lasting impression. If Earth had any intention of re-entering the galactic stage, they weren't going to do it quietly. The galaxy just didn't know how loud that entrance was going to be. The Galactic Council convened in a frenzy, their chambers more chaotic than usual. These were beings accustomed to order, power, and control, but the sudden silence from Earth had them disoriented. They couldn't remember the last time they'd been this uncertain, if ever. The usual smug confidence that oozed from every word had been replaced by a nervous energy that was palpable, as if even the walls of the council chambers could feel the tension. To the casual observer, it might have looked like a political summit. But to anyone paying attention, it was clear. The galaxy was teetering on the edge of something enormous, and no one knew how to stop it. Some of the more optimistic members tried to maintain composure. It's just a communication error, they insisted, though their voices betrayed them. These were the same people who had long dismissed humanity as nothing more than a nuisance. They had underestimated Earth's resolve for so long, and now, faced with the unprecedented absence of human activity, they were scrambling to pretend it was no big deal. But the longer the silence stretched, the more difficult it became to convince anyone of that. The more paranoid factions, the ones who always had a contingency plan for every scenario, no matter how unlikely, had already moved into high alert. Fleet readiness drills were being conducted across multiple systems. Weapons were being double-checked. Ships were rerouted, and commanders were briefed on a protocol they had never dreamed they'd have to follow. After all, how could you prepare for the possibility that a planet that had once been a chaotic mess of human life had suddenly become a quiet, lethal enigma? And then there were the neutral powers, those who had always stood on the sidelines, watching the Council's internal struggles from afar. They weren't about to get involved in whatever drama was unfolding. But even they couldn't ignore the shifting tides. The trade routes to Earth were being diverted. Cargo ships, once on a regular schedule, now hesitated before taking off, wondering if Earth's silence was the precursor to something far worse than a diplomatic breakdown. It wasn't just Earth's sudden disappearance that had everyone on edge, it was the creeping suspicion that the humans had been planning something all along. In private, the Council's leaders whispered about the possibility that Earth had already uncovered something the rest of the galaxy hadn't even dared to imagine. A weapon so powerful that it made even their most sophisticated technologies look like mere toys. They'd always been wary of Earth's capacity for invention, and now it seemed like those fears had evolved into something darker. What if Earth had figured out a way to strike first, to claim its power on the galactic stage? And what if that power didn't come from bombs or guns, but from something far more subtle? Some suggested that Earth's silence was a masterstroke of psychological warfare. Imagine it. The entire galaxy paralyzed by doubt, unsure of whether they were dealing with an extinction-level threat or a miscommunication. The real question was, what did Earth want? Was it a declaration of war, or was it just a warning? A galactic wake-up call, perhaps. No one knew, and that was what made it so terrifying. The Council tried to rally their resources, but it was clear they were running out of time. Every second Earth remained silent was another second the galaxy spent looking over its shoulder, wondering if today was the day they'd be forced to face the consequences of underestimating humanity. It was the kind of tension that makes you question every decision you've ever made, and for some it was quickly becoming the kind of tension that could send entire empires spiraling into chaos. The Council was used to holding the reins of the galaxy, but now, for the first time in centuries, they had no idea who was holding the leash. Weeks passed, and Earth remained silent. The once vibrant chatter of the galaxy had morphed into an undercurrent of paranoia. The Council, despite their best efforts to reassure themselves and the rest of the galaxy, couldn't shake the unease settling over them. Every empire, every species, every trader was waiting for the other shoe to drop. And no one knew when or even if it would. But everyone was bracing for the inevitable. Some factions, sensing an opportunity, began to take advantage of the chaos. Smugglers, pirates, and opportunists that had once been wary of crossing galactic borders now saw the disruption as a golden opportunity to slip past the watchful eyes of the Council. Weapons, stolen technologies, illegal goods, everything was moving freely, as though the rules of the galaxy had suddenly been rewritten. In the shadows, small skirmishes broke out between factions looking to capitalize on Earth's disappearance. But none of these tensions were nearly as important as the looming question everyone was afraid to voice: what if Earth wasn't coming back? Across multiple sectors, rumors began circulating that Earth's silence wasn't an accident. It wasn't a malfunction. It wasn't a technical glitch. Some said the humans had disappeared, not gone dark, not fallen silent by choice, but had simply been wiped out. A catastrophic event, perhaps. A catastrophe so massive that it had taken Earth off the galactic map forever. The implications were staggering. If Earth had been destroyed, it meant that something had managed to overpower humanity's defenses. Something bigger than the greatest military the galaxy had ever known. The thought of it sent a chill through even the most hardened empires. Others, however, speculated that Earth had gone rogue, that the humans had finally decided to stop answering to the Council and everyone else. Perhaps they had turned their back on galactic politics altogether, realizing they were stronger than anyone had ever given them credit for. Maybe Earth was gearing up for a new era, one where they weren't bogged down by the Council's endless squabbles and backroom deals. If this was the case, the galaxy would need to brace itself, because humans had never played by anyone's rules except their own. A few, more optimistic species held out hope. They convinced themselves that Earth's silence was simply a phase, a temporary break from the chaos of intergalactic politics. But even they began to look over their shoulders. There was no more trade with Earth, no more communication. Every ship that passed through Earth's solar system now did so with a nervous glance toward its empty orbit. There was no signal, no warning. The galaxy had become a vacuum, echoing with uncertainty. The worst part was the waiting. Everyone hated it. For some, the silence was a headache. For others, it was a ticking clock. Those who had once dismissed humanity as nothing more than a fledgling species now had to confront the possibility that they had been wrong all along. It was a realization that was creeping across the galaxy like an infection, slowly, subtly, but undeniably. They had all assumed that Earth was just another player in the galactic game. But what if humanity had just removed itself from the board? What if Earth wasn't going to wait for permission to act anymore? The galaxy held its breath, suspended in a moment of collective anxiety. And then, like an electric charge in the air, something shifted. A signal, tiny, barely detectable, cracked through the silence. It wasn't much, but it was enough. Enough to send a ripple of panic through the galaxy, enough to make every single eye in the galaxy turn toward Earth, waiting for the storm to break. The signal was barely a whisper, but in the silence of the galaxy it felt like a scream. It wasn't much, just a faint pulse, a flicker of something that had been buried under the weight of time. But it was enough to ignite a wildfire of speculation. Everyone, from the most seasoned diplomats to the lowliest space scavengers, stopped what they were doing and turned their eyes toward Earth. It was as if the whole galaxy had been holding its breath, and now they had finally exhaled. The Council was in full panic mode, scrambling to decipher the signal. It was so weak, so distorted, that at first, no one even knew if it was real. Some argued it was just static, others claimed it was an ancient transmission from a long-forgotten civilization. But those who had been paying close attention knew better. Earth wasn't just returning, it was sending a message. And whatever that message was, it wasn't one anyone wanted to miss. The first interpretation was that Earth had somehow regained control of its systems, that the long silence had merely been a test of some kind. But that was the optimistic view. The more paranoid factions believed the signal was a declaration, one that would shake the galaxy to its core. After all, Earth wasn't a planet known for playing nice with others. The humans didn't ask for permission to do things, they just did them. And the fact that they were speaking now after so long made everyone wonder, what was Earth preparing to unleash? Soon, every corner of the galaxy was buzzing. Ships that had been drifting aimlessly now fired up their engines, heading straight for Earth's orbit, hoping to be the first to make contact. Some fleets arrived in full battle readiness just in case. They weren't taking any chances. Others came with open arms, hoping that the silence was just a misunderstanding and that everything could be smoothed over with a few kind words. But no one truly knew what to expect. The galaxy had underestimated Earth once too often to assume they were anything other than wildcards. As for Earth itself, the once bustling planet had grown eerily calm. The cities that had once blared with noise were now quiet. Satellites that had once hummed with data were still. No one knew where the humans were, or what their plans were. But the signal made one thing clear: Earth wasn't dead, and it wasn't hiding. It was waiting. And now, with the whole galaxy on edge, it seemed the humans had the upper hand. The Council, now fully on edge, debated for hours over what to do. Some suggested sending an envoy to Earth immediately, hoping to smooth things over. But the more practical members were adamant that this could be a trap. What if Earth had developed a new weapon? What if the signal was just bait? What if they had lured the galaxy into a false sense of security, only to strike when they least expected it? Some began to question if Earth had already changed the balance of power permanently. The signal wasn't just a message, it was a statement. A reminder that no one, no matter how powerful, could ever truly control humanity. If Earth was ready to engage again, it was on their terms. And for the first time in galactic history, it seemed the galaxy had been put on notice. No one could hide from the humans anymore. All across the galaxy, there was one thought that echoed louder than any other. Earth had gone silent for so long. But now that they were speaking again, everyone had to listen. The moment Earth spoke again, it wasn't with the roar that some expected, nor with the subtlety others hoped for. It was a single simple word broadcast across the galaxy on every channel available. No fanfare. No grand speech. Just a brief chilling message that carried the weight of centuries. The word echoed across every star system, sinking into the hearts of the galaxy's inhabitants like a stone dropped into the deepest ocean. Enough. It wasn't a declaration of war. It wasn't a plea for peace. It wasn't even a warning. It was a statement. A boundary set in the sand, drawn by a hand no one had thought to question before. And the galaxy didn't know what to do with it. Silence followed the transmission, a deep, uncomfortable quiet that stretched across sectors. The council sat stunned, unsure of how to respond. They had all assumed the humans would come back with a firestorm, with demands, with conditions. But instead they'd been met with a single ominous word. Enough. Some thought it was an invitation, a call to sit down and talk, to discuss whatever had kept the humans quiet for so long. Others, those who knew humanity too well, understood that this wasn't an offer to negotiate. It was a challenge, the kind of challenge that made every empire pause, recalibrate, and wonder if it was time to rethink their position in the galaxy. Earth had always played the long game, and now, with a single word, it seemed they were ready to start again, on their own terms. Panic rippled through the galactic systems. Empires scrambled to reassess their plans, shift resources, and prepare for whatever was coming next. There was no consensus on what enough meant. Some figured Earth was tired of the constant chaos, ready to strike out and claim its place as the dominant force in the galaxy. Others feared Earth had been gathering its strength for a far more subtle plan, one that could dismantle entire systems before anyone even realized what had happened. But amid all the fear, one thing became painfully clear. Earth had re-entered the stage, not as a pawn, but as a king. The galaxy's long-standing assumption that humanity was a ragtag bunch of troublemakers who could be pushed around was suddenly obsolete. Earth's silence had been the calm before the storm, and now that the storm had broken, no one knew if they could weather it. Meanwhile, the more cynical and self-assured factions couldn't help but laugh nervously at the implications. Enough? They scoffed. That's it? What, they think we're afraid of a word? But the laughter was hollow. The weight of what had just been said hung in the air like a fog, and deep down, even the bravest among them knew they were in uncharted territory. The galaxy had spent centuries underestimating humanity's potential for both chaos and brilliance, and now Earth was making it clear that they would never be underestimated again. Whether it was a warning or a promise, enough was a statement that couldn't be ignored. As the stars flickered around the galaxy, one thought dominated every mind. Earth had gone silent for too long. Now that they were speaking, the entire galaxy was listening. The real question now wasn't whether Earth had the power to reshape the galaxy. It was whether anyone else was prepared for the humans' next move. The galaxy's trembling silence had become its loudest cry for attention, and in the quiet aftermath of that one word, the universe held its breath, waiting for the humans to make their next move. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Sci-Fi Horizons Stories for more thrilling tales of science fiction and adventure. Buckle up, because the cosmos has endless surprises waiting just for you.